Yesterday, I posted a video about Double or Nothing, the new James Bond book by Sherwood, and now I am incredibly excited to share with you the opportunity I had to talk with Kim herself. So stay tuned.
So Kim, I'm really flattered to get the opportunity to speak to you because I've been a James Bond fan my whole life. I'm so invested in books and things like that, and then it's nice to feel included. Yeah, it means a lot. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure. It's so lovely to chat with you. And I feel like I know you because, we've connected on Instagram, but also because your review of Testament was just so thoughtful and kind and considerate. And I found it really moving. So it's lovely to actually get a chance to connect with you properly.
Well, this book actually made water fall out my eyes. As this. It's funny, it was really amazing, like reading this particular book because this is the only published book you've got so far.
It's my first novel, yeah.
Yes, and it was amazing because I was so excited to hear that you've been chosen to write this trilogy of set in the James Bond universe, and I really thought it would be a good idea to read your first book and get an idea of things, and I did not expect it to be to hit me quite as hard as it did because there are a lot of themes and things going on in it that were so reflective of my life, and I find that so fascinating, and it felt very intimate walking through your mind and seeing that you had shared experiences that I had shared and things like this, and the relationship between the two brothers is just amazing, and that was what really got me because my brother has passed away now, but he and I had this weird relationship like that, and it was reliving it all over again, which was very moving. So I was very impressed with that book.
Thank you. Well, that's really lovely for me to hear. And I think a lot of my writing really is about relationships between characters, and then also the relationship between me and the reader. So I'm always really moved to hear from somebody that something's kind of connected with them personally.
And there's something that resonated with me a lot in this are the James Bond references, which and they're great, and they fit very seamlessly, which I really like.
Thank you. Yeah. So I wrote Testament before, before I knew that this would happen, that I would be asked by the Ian Fleming estate to write Bond. But I've been a Bond fan all of my life. So, for me, putting in Bond references or putting in Bond jokes and things like that, it's so natural. And I do remember my editor for Testament saying, so why is the character of Eva so interested in James Bond? No reason, just because, But I think it certainly helped me when, the Fleming estate were reading the book and saw those references and saw that, that it's been a lifelong love of mine.
Well, I mean, that was very obvious and I think that's the other thing when the announcement was made about you writing this book, and everyone followed you on social media. It was like, look, her bookshelf looks exactly like my bookshelf. It's like she really is one of us, which is so wonderful, and it's great, and it's exciting, which brings me on to this whole question of the estate of Ian Fleming. They are not exactly the Marvel Cinematic Universe when it comes out to handing out opportunities to tell stories in this world, and so I would love to know how you got the opportunity to write this trilogy of books.
Yeah, well, so I have been saying to people all of my life, oh, one day I'd love to write James Bond. But, we all say that to people. You don't really expect anybody to kind of take it very seriously at any point. But it's a lesson in, saying mad things out loud, just in case one day the right person is listening to you. Because I had mentioned this the first time I ever had lunch with my agent, Sue, who's a fantastic agent, as the story illustrates. So the first time we went out for lunch together, I said, she asked me sort of, what are your writing dreams and ambitions? And I said, God, if I could ever write Bond, that would be amazing. So she sort of stored that away. And then she heard that the Fleming family, who still, run the literary side of Bond, that they were looking for a new author because Anthony Horowitz's tenure, of course, is kind of coming to an end. So they were sort of on the hunt for a new writer. And Sue heard this and remembered that that I'd kind of said this would be like a lifelong dream. And she remembered that I had tweeted back in 2018 when Testament came out, I had tweeted a picture of it in a bookshop next to Anthony Horowitz's Bond. And I tweeted one step closer to my dream of writing Bond. And she remembered I'd done that, and she scrolled back through my Twitter to 2018, found that post, screenshot it and sent it over to the Flemings and said, maybe this is the writer for you. And they then read Testament and they really liked it. And I'm sure the Bond references helped. And they asked me to kind of send them some ideas, if I were to do it, send them some ideas. But they also asked me, was there a way I could sort of demonstrate my love for Bond? Because, of course, this is their family legacy. They take it incredibly seriously. And they only want writers sort of playing in this sandbox if they're genuine Bond fans, And anybody can say, I love Bond. Everybody does say, I love Bond. So, they were saying, is there a way you can kind of demonstrate that love? Unfortunately for me, my mum had kept a copy of a school report I'd done when I was probably about 13. It was a bit of homework, and the task was like, write about an author you admire. And I'd written about Ian Fleming, and I'd done this little booklet on him, and it's illustrated and everything, and it had pop-out bits, and we still had that in the house. So my sister dug it out and took pictures, and I sent the scans over to the Flemings, and I just said, this is quite literally a lifelong dream. And I sent them some ideas, which they liked, and it all kind of took off from there. So really, it is a lesson in sort of saying bonkers things out loud and seeing what happens.
Oh, that's amazing! What an amazing story!
Yeah, it was incredible.
Okay, so as was it 12-year-old Kim, how did you get into James Bond?
So my first interaction with Bond, probably for a lot of people my age, was through Pierce Brosnan's films coming on the TV. So I first watched Bond, I would have been under 10 when his films came onto the TV. And I remember just being entranced because I'd always played like spy games. I used to spy on all of my neighbors. I'd go around with like a magnifying glass and I'd write stories about them in invisible ink that you had to set fire to and everything. So I'd always kind of loved like playing at spies, and then seeing Bond and seeing the sort of, Brosnan's films were so spectacular. So seeing the dive off the dam, the sequence with the Millennium Dome, and the Millennium Dome was such a big thing then, when I was growing up, it was like it was being built for ages and it was constantly like falling down. And then there he was falling down it. And I always loved that moment that goes after he's sort of tumbled down the Millennium Dome, and then it goes into the credits when he's hit the floor and he's so sort of bashed up, but he hits the floor and then he gets back up again. And I always loved that idea of this hero who will get back up again and sort of shrug it off and walk on. So I loved Brosnan's. And then when I was about 12, I think I said to my mom, I really want to write a spy story. So I was always writing as a kid. I said, I want to write a spy book, but I don't know how. And my mom said, well, you should read some, which is very good advice. So we were in Camden. There's a fantastic secondhand bookshop in Camden. And we were just outside it. So we went in and I bought From Russia with Love in the pan paperback, those quite pulpy covers, which I really love. And I just loved his writing from the beginning. I think Fleming's style isn't talked about enough because, in a way, because he invented an iconic character. And I think then people focus on the character. Completely fair enough. But for me, his visual style, I think the films borrowed a lot of their cinematic language from the way Fleming writes about place, the way he writes color, the way his imagery is often quite unsettling, quite uncanny. So From Russia with Love opens with something like the naked man lying beside the swimming pool might have been dead. And then immediately you're like, why might he be dead? What's happened? And who is he? And why is he naked? And then his body's described as inanimate meat, and it's kind of roasting in the sun, and it's this like lurid color. So I was just immediately drawn into the way he wrote, and I read all of the books. And I think his style in lots of ways influenced mine. And that might sound strange to people in that Testament isn't a spy novel and it's not a crime novel. But I think the way Fleming writes about place with that very observational eye has influenced how I think about writing about place. And also his dialogue. I love his dialogue. And that's one of the things I find most fun to write as well. So I think, from that early age, Fleming was really influencing my writing in lots of different directions.
Yeah, I think when I reviewed Testament, I mentioned that as one of the things, because the dialogue was very punchy. Fleming had this unique economy of words, and I guess it was his journalistic background. Yeah. It's just as you were saying, and even with 5 words, he manages to pick the ideal words that can add so much more nuance to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sometimes I always love those moments when he lets himself go a bit, because he has, I think economy of words is the perfect way to put it. He has these quite terse sentences in a way. There's a sort of bluntness to it. So then when he lets himself go on a really long sentence, so a moment, for example, in Goldfinger when he's describing the hotel, and he does that view of the hotel from sort of Bond's perspective, of Bond standing on the balcony, and then he looks out over the levels of the hotel and out to the view, and there's a lovely line about the sort of the flags of different nations being stirred, and it's a collection of run-on sentences, really, because the view is so long, and I always kind of love those moments because you can see Fleming sort of, his style is quite contained, and then he'll kind of let himself go because the moment's right, and then he'll sort of pull it back in again. As somebody who's guilty of a long sentence, I like that.
Now, talking about Fleming letting himself go, I think one of the things people always think of the movies, and I think James Bond has a perhaps fair or not fair representation of being like misogynist and old-fashioned and things like this. I always found that books had certain elements of that, as you'd imagine from Fleming being a man of that era. But there's this subversive element throughout. I was thinking certain things that were considered scandalous at the time, like the way Honey Rider's bottom was described as like that of a boy and stuff like that. Yeah. And I find it so interesting that the James Bond community has blown up, but it is not just a particular small subset of like 40-year-old tedious men. Like it's actually a huge plethora of people involved. David Trowbridge Ellis, who does License to Queer, like the essays that he posts on that website, deconstructing it from like a queer angle, are amazing. And when it comes to like elements like that in all of the original Ian Fleming books, I mean, like, where does the connection happen?
Well, I think you're so right to point to License to Queer, and I would really suggest, I'm sure your viewers know it, but if folks haven't listened to that podcast or read those essays, I just think how David writes about it is so brilliant. And I think he points out in a lot of his essays that there's those surprising elements to Fleming and to Bond that one might have overlooked, or perhaps aren't as talked about or kind of related to Bond. I think people have an idea of what Bond is, and you sort of have a checklist of, it's the martinis, or it's the Aston Martin, or it's this or it's that. But there's a lot more depth, I would say, both in the films and the books, that often is overlooked. And I think you're right to say that the books have some unexpected elements. So, for example, how, and I guess this is just on my mind at the moment with things that are in the news, but how Fleming writes about abortion, that's not necessarily what you'd expect from books of that era. So there's things that come up in the books that might surprise people. And I think also the female characters, yes, they fit into a certain sort of mold, it's almost like quest literature, and they're the sort of the women he's going to meet on his quest who will sort of give him a magical gift or whatever. In some ways it's quite archetypal, but I think that the Bond model gives us a story where with each novel or with each film, we're going to have one or two main female characters, and particularly in the books, we're going to learn a lot about their backgrounds. They're going to have their own agency, their own reason for being part of the story, their own thing that they want to get from the end. They're often very independent. They're often orphaned. Again, there's a sort of fairy tale aspect to that. They're often professional, journalists or actors, and they have their own lives that Bond kind of collides with, and then you see sort of what comes out of the collision. And you get more of that in the book sometimes in the films, possibly just simply because of what point of view can give you in prose in a way that it can't give you in films. But I think that sometimes, some of my favorite women in the Bond novels didn't even make it to screen. I'd love to see Gala Brand from Fleming's Moonraker. Or, she's one of my favorite of his female characters. And she's a policewoman. And it's her investigation. She's been undercover for a year, and then Bond kind of comes in, and she thinks, oh God, here comes this 00 there's that great line, something like, whose easy smile and gun might be useful abroad, but is absolutely useless here.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot in the Fleming books that might surprise people, and that I would love to see adapted onto screen.
And it's funny, if in the Bond community, you think of the Bond girls who like the men post the most, and it's always like Vesper Lind and Tracy and the ones in which real romance and love and thing actually were important to the plot. Absolutely. And when you think about Bond's character, both the novel and films, but of course we only got Casino Royale, more recently, but in the films, but in the books,
this is a character whose arc is shaped by that first relationship with Vesper. That shapes everything that's to come with that character. And we do have, I think, in some ways, much more of an arc with Bond in the novels compared to the films, or at least the earlier films, which tended to be much more standalone. Whereas the novels, you do, if you compare, for example, his attitude and relationships with women from the first book to the last book, it's completely different. He's aged, he's experienced loss, he's experienced love. And I always really love reading the books in order and just seeing, the kind of evolution of that character through his arc.
Yeah, and I find it so interesting to compare that to the evolution of Ian Fleming's life and where the mirrors are there. Well, speaking about that, let's talk about, Ian Fleming passed away, and then the Bond legacy was handed on to sort of Kingsley Amis and then other writers and things. Do you feel like pressure stepping into this? I mean, like Anthony Horowitz and Sebastian Faulks and things like that. They're writers who came with huge back catalogues and stuff like that. And it must be a really exciting opportunity.
Oh, absolutely amazing. I think it's there's that saying in like sports, pressure is a privilege, and I've been thinking about that because it is a lot of pressure. But what an enormous privilege to have that pressure, and it's very surreal. Like I often have to sort of remind myself that it's actually happening. To follow on from somebody like Anthony Horowitz. I grew up reading the Alex Rider books. I loved those books as a kid. I love Anthony Horowitz's writing. So to actually get to meet him, and to, there was they do this kind of premiere of the film for the Fleming family. And the Flemings kind of invite along their writers. So we went along to that, and before the film there was sort of drinks, and got to meet Anthony Horowitz, and I got to meet Charlie Higson, and these are writers that I love so much and admire, and then we were all kind of off in a corner together talking about how you write a Bond villain. And I really felt like I was sort of floating up outside of my body and looking down at this and thinking, like, if my 12-year-old self could see this, it's quite phenomenal, really. Oh,
I love Charlie Higson's Young Bond books. I just thought those were brilliant.
Yeah, so good. And they came a little bit after I kind of grew up on Alex Rider, and then I read the Charlie Higson books to my cousin, who's about 12 years younger than me, and a massive Bond fan, so I basically raised him in my image, made him be a Bond fan. And those books are just such fantastic introductions. I think that if people have kids and are wondering, where to start with reading Bond, I think that's a great place.
That's a brilliant. Oh, now I have no idea how much time we were scheduled for, so.
I am fine for as long as you want to talk to me.
That's great. I was like, oh god, I've got so many questions I want to ask him. I have to go through it. Speaking of that, you said something earlier that I really, really liked, which was sandbox. It's like, you know, and I think to me, you make sense of the continuation novels as like an author's sandbox. There's like the Gardner verse and the Benson verse, and then Sebastian Faulks might have only written one book, but it's the Faulks verse. So I guess you have your own sandbox to play with. How much of that was direction from the estate of Ian Fleming, and how much leeway were you given?
Well, first of all, I love the idea of a Sherwood verse. That's great. So really a lot of freedom. I was sort of given two criteria. They wanted the book to be set in the present day, so they wanted a contemporary series, and they wanted it to be a trilogy, and they wanted it to kind of expand. We're thinking of it as sort of expanding the James Bond universe, so bring in other 00 characters who can be sort of new heroes, and that was all I was told. So within that framework, it was up to me to kind of work out who are these new 00s? Where does Bond stand in relation to them? What is the 00 section like in literature in the present day? Because of course the films have continually updated it, but that hasn't happened to that extent in the sort of continuation novels. So really, I was given a lot of freedom to imagine into that, and the Fleming estate are remarkably encouraging. They're very much say, we chose you, you're our author. We trust you, and we want to sort of hear what you have to say, which has been an amazing experience for me as a writer.
I find that really fair. I was really wanting to ask what was the decision between setting it in the modern day and setting it in the past. And it's really interesting that came from them. I think I really enjoyed With a Mind to Kill, the last Horowitz book, but I have to admit, I like the whole idea of James Bond being missing, because in some ways he maybe just, we've had this. I didn't know where else you could go with James Bond, so maybe
Right.
him being missing for a bit is going to be exactly what we need. And the three characters you've come up with to tell this story through, I find so fascinating as a choice. There's of course Sid and Joe and Joanna. Don't think I didn't catch Joanna Hartwood being the co-writer of the Doctor No screenplay, and was it From Russia with Love as well? She did.
Yeah.
Yes, that's great. So I think these are brilliant choices, because to me these people represent not just what the real Secret Service is these days, because we do so much stuff with Muslim activists and stuff. Sid Bashir is like a natural choice, and very, very British, because Britain has become such a multicultural place. I mean, you talk about Joe, and then the whole history of the Secret Service. So much relied on secret agents who were actually gay and had so much pressure and shame put on them at that time. I remember David posted a picture the other day. It was an advert for The Spy Who Loved Me, and it was saying like, this must be fiction because it's a spy who likes women, because that's how synonymous that was. And then of course you got Joanna, and women in the Ian Fleming books are all secretaries. Whereas, well, no, that's not true. We spoke about how, Garla Brown was a policewoman and stuff. But in the Secret Service, we didn't really get any women who weren't Miss Moneypenny or Mary Goodnight or something like that. So tell me about coming up with these characters and why you picked them. I'd love to know.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm really pleased you enjoyed them. So I sort of was thinking about if you sort of move Bond to the side, and that felt necessary to me, because I felt like, Bond is a star. He occupies a role in our culture that's, I would say, fairly unique. And if he's on screen or if he's on the page, he's who you're going to pay attention to. You're gonna look that way. It doesn't matter who else sort of in the scene. So I thought, if I'm going to introduce these new heroes, I need to sort of get him into the margins of the page. But I didn't want to sort of remove him from the story entirely, because I love Bond, so I don't want him to be gone. But I thought, if something has happened to him, and you find out at the beginning of the book that he's been missing for some time, he's possibly been captured, he's possibly dead, they don't know. But you then have the other double O's sort of working in relationship to him and to his absence. So we have these three sort of heroes, as you said, these three other double O characters. And when I was planning the characters out, I imagined it like a galaxy. And I thought, if he's the star and he has like the greatest gravity and he's in the middle, where do the other characters sort of sit in relation to his gravity? How far away are they from him, or how close are they going to be to him? So with somebody like 003, Johanna Harwood, she's had a romantic relationship with him. They were very close to each other. The fact that he's missing is devastating to her, and she wants to find him and get him back. 009, Sid Bashir, Bond was kind of his mentor, and there's a sort of personal link there, and also a sense for Bashir, I think, that it was his responsibility that Bond went missing, and a sort of mistake he wants to fix. And there's also something of a kind of love triangle between the three, because after Harwood and Bond were together, Harwood and Bashir then got engaged. So you have that sort of tension of them as a three. So they sort of sit very closely to Bond's star. And then somebody like 004, Joseph Dryden, I kind of imagine him further away. He has his own storyline. He didn't really know Bond personally. For him, Bond was a sort of somewhat surly and arrogant, attractive man who was in the office occasionally, and now he's missing. The main problem there is that it's a security breach, and that's what concerns him. So I felt that way, that there was a sort of entry point for readers, different entry point for readers, for readers who think, I'm here for Bond is what I want. You've got the characters who are very close to him. And for readers who think, I'm up for a new story, you've got the characters who are sort of further away. So that was the way it evolved in my mind. I mean, I couldn't have told you that clearly when I was first doing it, but that was the creative process. And then I was developing the backgrounds for each character. So for 004, Joseph Dryden, I don't think this is too spoilery because this is all sort of revealed at the beginning. He used to be in special forces, and I was interested in writing about that because that's a really common route here for soldiers who have been in special forces, have been at that sort of elite level, and they've been operating over a couple of decades, hundreds of individual missions, often 2 or 3 services of war. And their bodies, eventually their bodies give out, but they have this abundance of experience and training. So they often transition from a kind of frontline service role into MI6. And I thought that's a really interesting transition. What would that be like, especially if you had been injured and if it was a medical reason that took you off the front line. So that's what happens with Dryden. He sustains, through an explosion, sustains an injury to his hearing that means that Moneypenny recruits him to the 00 section. So I was interested in bringing in a character through him who has that kind of military background and now has, in a sense, a troubled relationship with their body. He's always been able to rely on his body as a warrior, and now it's been compromised, and he's trying to learn this new role of being a 00. So that was sort of how that character developed. And then with 003, Johanna Harwood, as you said, named after the first woman to write Bond, co-wrote Dr. No and From Russia with Love. And I wrote to the real Johanna Harwood. I just wrote her a letter and said, like, is it okay if I do this? And I sort of explained my reasons, and she was very lovely and gracious about it. And I felt important to me to sort of, if she was okay with it, and she was, luckily, to kind of pay that homage to the women of Bond, because they've always been women of Bond, in front of and behind the scenes. So that was lovely to be able to do that. And with her character, I was thinking a lot about this idea of a license to kill, what it means to have a license to kill, because on the surface, it sounds really fun and cool. But when you think about it, to have that responsibility and to have to kill 2 people to get it, so you're already kind of steeped in a certain amount of blood, what does that do to you over a long period? And so I began to think about what's the opposite of a license to kill. And I thought it's the Hippocratic Oath. It's a doctor's oath to heal everybody. So then I thought, what if there was a character who had trained as a surgeon, as Harwood 003 does, and then something happens in her life that kind of diverts her from that purpose, and she's recruited into being a 00. So she has those 2 sides to her, that kind of oath to heal and that license and oath, in a sense, to kill. So I wanted to explore that duality, because if you have somebody who's capable of that duality, then they are capable of a kind of multiplicity. And I think that for me, that's Harwood's perhaps main skill, is her adaptability and her persuasiveness, that she can be whatever the person opposite her needs her to be.
Which
in
is
any given
the
moment.
perfect skill set for a spy.
Exactly. And I was curious about, what does that do to you? It's the perfect skill set for a spy, but then who are you inside if you're always being something for somebody else? Who are you ultimately? So that was sort of some of the ideas and themes I was interested in exploring with Harwood's character. And then with 009, Sid Bashir, I was really interested in the strategy side of things. So Sid's background is that he was a champion chess player as a student. And he's kind of recruited through that because he happens to be in the right place at the right time for the needs of MI6. And he has a very brilliant mind, a very strategic mind, but in some ways he's attempting to commit himself to a sort of utilitarian philosophy that he'll do whatever is for the good of the many, even if it means sacrificing the few. And that in some ways is the opposite of the ideology or the kind of belief system that he's been brought up with, which is that to save one's soul is to save all of humanity. So he is sort of, in a way, battling between a life of the heart and a life of the mind. And I was interested in that notion, but particularly in relation to Bond, because, I don't see Bond this way, but Bond is often described as a blunt instrument. So I sort of felt like, what would it be like if you had a very fine precision instrument in that role,
Oh, I like that. Okay. I was just going to say, the thing's going to run out in 10 minutes, so I've got to ask all my questions very quickly. I just got a big pop-up warning. First of all, as a complete aside, I think we're at the moment same kind of like nerd level. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that's going to completely send me far nerdier, or maybe we'll go down together. Does Bashir have any link to the character of Bashir in Star Trek Deep Space Nine?
Absolutely.
Yes, there we go. I was like,
nerd scales together. Absolutely. So that was one of my first, introductions to Bond as a kid, was seeing that Bond-themed episode of DS9, Our Man Bashir, where Dr. Bashir, is like fantasy playing Bond. And I just thought he was so cool, as a kid. I always thought, well, why isn't this guy Bond? He's awesome, So when I had this opportunity, I thought, I have to do a little hat tip to that,
I love that, and that's who I had playing the role in my head, kind of thing.
Excellent. Yeah, if I could go back in time to the mid-90s, he is who I would cast.
I was then going to ask about. Sorry, I just got two dings there. I was going to ask about, okay, so this is set in the modern day, and that must have been kind of a challenge to come strictly from a literary viewpoint. So how much of the movies do you think actually influenced that? And in some ways, especially the opening scene where Bashir is going through the camp to try and rescue someone, no spoilers, but that was written very much almost like a movie, and it was like fast-paced action thing. So how much do the movies influence the book?
I think the influence is unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that these things they work in relationship to each other. The Fleming novels and the films, as I said earlier, I feel like the films borrowed a lot of their sort of visual language from the way Fleming writes about his settings, uses color. So I think, from the beginning, the films were sort of picking up from Fleming. But of course, the films have this sort of huge scale they can work on, and they're very visually spectacular, both in terms of stunts and action and everything, but also Ken Adams' set designs. When we think Bond, we think that massive level of action, that massive level of sort of grandeur to things. So I wanted to draw on that, and in a way, the opening chapter, you could say it's a kind of pre-title sequence, because that's what we as Bond fans, I think, expect. That's how a Bond story opens, and I tried to sort of bring the two together. So the Fleming novels, I wouldn't say he has a standard opening, but they perhaps have more introspective openings than the films. If you compare, say, for example, the opening to the novel of Goldfinger to the film of Goldfinger, the novel starts with Bond kind of being sick of killing people, and the film opens with, the positively shocking joke. It's him laughing about killing people.
That is literally, that you can't get further apart than those two.
Yeah. So we have this, I hope, opening action sequence that's really exciting, but it's also a kind of introspective moment for the character, in that there's a lot at stake, and his sense of his own self really is at stake, I think, in that opening chapter.
Okay, so before we run out of time, I have to move on. One of the things you do, you have is it called Substack, a newsletter that you can subscribe to. That I've subscribed to that, to all of them, and I find them absolutely delightful. And it's in terms of, since launching this, hopefully you feel embraced by the Bond community. But can you tell me about some of the relationships you've had, and where that leads on to your other novel, which is coming out soon?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh gosh, the sort of reception has been amazing from the Bond community. I feel so lucky that the Bond community is so positive. Not to sort of cast aspersions on any other fan communities. I'm sure they're
Star Wars.
Wonderful identities, but. However, I feel very fortunate that the Bond one is so inclusive, and it's just amazing to see the reception when it was made public. Not least because it had been a secret for a long time. I wasn't allowed to talk about it with anybody. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone what I was doing. So when we finally did make it public, and the news kind of broke here, I sort of thought, I wonder if anyone will even notice or care. And then it all just kind of blew up, and suddenly my face was in newspapers all over the world, and it was really surreal. So to have that warmth from the community was just really amazing and encouraging. So I've been really grateful for that. And the newsletter kind of came out of that, because I felt like people seemed to be interested in my process, and just interested in if I was watching a Bond film, what I thought about it, or and I was sort of surprised anybody cared that much. But then I thought, actually, it's really nice. It's nice to be able to form these relationships with people. I feel like I know you, even though we've not spoken before. And the same with David at the Bond Experience, or David at License to Queer. David's 1 and 2. They can sort out between them which one is number 1, which one's number 2. So I thought Substack is a nice way to get to have longer conversations with people, that aren't sort of limited by characters. So it's been a lovely way to kind of talk about my process, and especially because at the moment, as you say, I've got, so the next book to come out will be Double or Nothing, and that's the first in the trilogy. That's out September 1st, but then I have another book coming out spring 2023, which is my next sort of, I guess you could say literary novel, whatever that means. It's a slightly nebulous term, but my next book that's not a Bond book, which I've been writing, on and off, obviously, but for 14 years. So that'll be amazing to have that out. And that's historical. It begins in the 18th century in Devon, which is a place that you and I have in common.
I know.
Yeah, and it's a kind of, I guess I would say, subversive smuggling adventure.
I love all of that stuff. Like, your mother lives in Cornwall, I know, and like I used to live in Cornwall and was obsessed with the wreckers and
yeah.
things like that. I used to live on the Isles of Scilly.
Yeah. Oh, it's an amazing landscape. So my mum lived in Devon for just over a decade, and now has moved to Cornwall, and that whole bit of the country. Well, it's the sunny bit for one thing, but yeah, it's just so beautiful. And it was moving there that inspired me to start writing this book 14 years ago.
I'm very excited for that one. That sounds right up my alley, which is great. I love it because we've got all these experiences. Okay, now I'm going to wrap things up before the Zoom thing kicks me out, because I don't want to lose any of this wonderful stuff. Oh, it has been such a treat speaking to you.
This has been so lovely. Thank you. And let's do it again.
Yes, I would love to do that. And before we go, if anybody wants to find you, where do they go? I'll put links in the... They can find me
it's at Kim T. Sherwood, both on Twitter and Instagram, and my Substack is Girl with the Golden Pen.
And I think I know the answer to this, but is the T in Kim T. Sherwood for Tiberius?
I wish it was, but no. It is for Tamar, after Tamerlane, the Mongolian warlord, which is a longer story than we have time for right now.
Okay, so well, we have to reconvene. We have to reconvene to have that conversation, because my middle child's middle name is Tiberius. So there we go.
Cool.
Right.
Your name choice.
Oh.
Excellent.
Yeah. See, I'm going to out nerd you at the end.
Yeah. You just teach me that.
No, thank you so much, Kim, and yes, best of luck with Double or Nothing. Keep us informed about your next novel as well, because that sounds great. And thanks. Yeah, it's been lovely, and I'm sure we'll speak lots before this actually goes live in September. Yeah, absolutely. Really nice to chat with you. Thank you. I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got a link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.